Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me in this session titled Creating Safer Spaces, SEPTED, Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design, Considerations, Mindful of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Concerns. I'm Misty Ladd, and it is my pleasure to present on this important topic in criminology. I come to you today as a 30-year veteran of the criminal justice industry, first as a private investigator, which morphed into an armed security officer position, then as a branch manager of a nationwide physical security company for 11 years. Currently, I am a university faculty with an emphasis in criminal justice and forensic psychology. Throughout these decades of changes, I have had the opportunity to observe crime prevention initiatives from many perspectives. In our brief time together today, I will share an overview of SEPTED, an outline of where we were, and potential historical flaws. Then I will review where we are now and a framework for discussion that I've developed with a hands-on application that focuses on 18 areas of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Funding is always a vital component when it comes to any crime prevention strategy, but this will not be discussed today due to time constraints on our meeting. We will touch slightly on the global differences of SEPTED, and I will conclude with 2 international organizations where you can learn more about this topic and links to the framework that I developed. You can utilize that framework in any way that you desire, and I'll have a link at the end for you to get a copy of that. The objective of this presentation is to equip you with a few resources and topics to share these important discussions in your own community or organization. So as a quick overview, for those who might not be as familiar with SEPTED, so in a summary, here's SEPTED in 100 words. Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design, SEPTED, is a multidisciplinary approach to reducing crime and enhancing safety in urban and community environments. It emphasizes the influence of physical and social environment on criminal behavior. SEPTED principles seek to create spaces that discourage criminal activity by improving visibility, promoting natural surveillance, and fostering a sense of ownership and community engagement. This approach involves thoughtful design and planning, such as well-lit public areas, clear sight lines, well-maintained properties, and community involvement. SEPTED aims to create safer, more vibrant neighborhoods by addressing the root causes of crime and enhancing the quality of life for its residents. So now to look at a little history of the SEPTED. So in the 60s, the early concepts of SEPTED began to emerge with the introduction of the concept defensible space by Oscar Newman. The next decade, in the 70s, we saw criminologist C. Ray Jeffrey coin the term crime prevention through environmental design. Plus, the NCPI began incorporating SEPTED principles into its training programs. Next, in the 80s, we saw Timothy Crow's publication became a significant contribution to the field, and urban planning and development projects were launched globally. In the 90s, the ICA was founded and guidelines were established for many countries, including the US, Canada, Australia, and the UK. The next decade was noted for incorporating technological advancements for crime prevention, such as surveillance systems and access control standards were developed and recommended in formal initiatives across the globe. In 2010, SEPTED continued to evolve and adapt to the changing urban landscape, including considerations for sustainability, resilience, and social inclusion. Although a few critics called for dismantling of SEPTED, the concepts increasingly began to integrate and adapt to the rapidly changing criminal justice environment. Stephen Lab states that the third generation of SEPTED core concepts includes 4 broad areas that there with many subsections under each area. First, he discusses place and under place, things such as safe homes, secure employment, activity centers, green space, new developments, healthy environments, natural surveillance, public transportation, and public education. Next, under the people category, he lists ability for people to be heard, communication, a sense of belonging, and community gatherings. In the technology aspect, he refers to energy efficiency, transparency, green energy, surveillance networks, real-time information, interaction, and cybernetics. And finally, in the network realm, physical networks for community, energy, communication, wireless networks for information transfer, and social networking. So do we believe the critics? Is it really broken? In a post-pandemic world, some critics of SEPTED have raised certain concerns and considerations. Here are some of the key criticisms. Public health focus. Critics argue that SEPTED's primary focus on crime prevention may neglect other important aspects of physical health and well-being. In a post-pandemic world, there is a growing recognition of the need to prioritize health and safety in urban environments, including considerations such as air quality, access to green space, and promoting active transportation. Critics argue that SEPTED should broaden its scope to encompass these broader public health concerns. The next criticism speaks to social equity and inclusion. Some critics argue that SEPTED can inadvertently contribute to social inequalities if not implemented with an equity lens. They suggest that certain SEPTED strategies, such as increased surveillance or target hardening measures, may disproportionately impact marginalized communities, reinforcing existing disparities and feelings of exclusion. Critics call for a more inclusive and participatory approach to SEPTED that addresses the needs and perspectives of all community members. Next, critics speak to the technological bias. With the rapid advent of technology, critics caution against relying too heavily on surveillance systems and emerging technologies for crime prevention. They argue that reliance on technology may reinforce existing biases and exacerbate privacy concerns. Critics call for a careful examination of the ethical implications of incorporating technology in SEPTED strategies. Next, critics speak to adaptive and resilient design. The pandemic has highlighted the need for adaptable and resilient urban design that can respond to unforeseen events and changing circumstances. Critics argue that SEPTED should evolve to include principles of adaptability and resilience, ensuring that urban spaces can effectively respond to future crises while maintaining safety, inclusivity, and functionality. Finally, critics talk to climate change and sustainability concerns. Critics emphasize that the importance of integrating climate change mitigation and adaptive strategies into SEPTED principles. As cities face increasing climate-related challenges such as extreme weather events, rising sea levels, critics argue that SEPTED should address environmental sustainability and resilience to build safer and more sustainable communities. It's important to note that these criticisms aim to improve the implementation and effectiveness of SEPTED rather than to dismiss its overall value. Incorporating these considerations can help ensure that SEPTED principles remain relevant, equitable, and responsive to the evolving needs of communities in a post-pandemic world. There are many different approaches or models that can be used to examine SEPTED principles in light of DEI and B concerns. In modern SEPTED planning, several key items typically are addressed to create safer, more inclusive environments. While the specific focus may vary depending on the context and goals of the particular project, here are some common elements. Natural surveillance, which means designing spaces that promote visibility and natural surveillance, is a fundamental aspect of SEPTED. This includes ensuring clear sightlines, minimizing visual obstructions, and providing adequate lighting to enhance safety and deter criminal activities. Next is access control. Managing and controlling access to spaces is essential for crime prevention. SEPTED emphasizes strategies such as designing entrances and exits that are easily supervised, implementing appropriate fencing or barriers, and utilizing landscaping to guide control and movement. Territorial reinforcement, creating a sense of ownership, is important in deterring crime behavior. SEPTED encourages the use of design elements such as landscaping, signage, and architecture to define and differentiate public and private spaces, promoting a sense of ownership among residents or users. The next key concept in SEPTED is target hardening. Implementing physical security measures to make properties or spaces less vulnerable to crime is another aspect of SEPTED. This can involve installing security systems, locks, alarms, and other measures that make it more difficult for potential offenders to commit crimes. Maintenance and management is another key area of SEPTED principles. Ensuring that proper maintenance and management of spaces is crucial for the long-term effectiveness in preventing crime. SEPTED planning emphasizes the importance of regular upkeep, repair, effective management strategies to deter criminal activities, and create safe and inviting environments. Social and community engagement, inclusion, and community engagement are increasingly recognized as important elements of SEPTED planning. Creating spaces that are inclusive, culturally sensitive, and responsive to the needs of a diverse community help foster a sense of belonging and ownership, contributing to the safe and more harmonious environments. Technology integration. With the advances in technology, integrating appropriate and ethical technology solutions can enhance SEPTED planning. This may include the use of surveillance systems, access control technology, smart lighting, and other technology tools that support safety and security. And finally, environmental sustainability. In modern SEPTED planning, there is a growing recognition of the importance of environmental sustainability. Incorporating sustainable design principles, energy-efficient lighting, green spaces, and climate-resilient strategies can help create healthier, more sustainable, and safer environments. These items represent key considerations in modern SEPTED planning, but it's important to tailor the approach to the specific context, taking into account local needs, culture, and community input. SEPTED is a flexible framework that can be adapted to various settings and continually evolves to address emerging challenges and goals in creating safer, more inclusive spaces. As such, I developed 18 categories of items that can serve as discussion topics in the initial SEPTED planning phase or in the classroom. I placed these topics on a small soccer ball where, when tossed to another person, the thumb placement indicates the sequence of discussions. It's hard to see on camera, but as you can see, this is the soccer ball, and on the hexagon squares, I wrote each one of these 18 topics in a Sharpie, and then as you toss or roll this across the desk or across the classroom, wherever the thumb lands of the person who catches it is the next topic up to discuss. So of course, I don't have time in this presentation to go through all 18, but I did want to just briefly show you the table and explain how it might be used. So it's a 3-page table with the 18 topics. On the left-hand side, the 18 topics. And then when someone lands on that topic, say, for instance, intersectionality, you as the moderator of this exercise would then discuss how intersectionality can apply in SEPTED principles. You can read the category that says intersectionality recognizes that individuals have unique safety concerns and vulnerabilities based on the intersection of their various identities, experiences, leading to a more inclusive and effective SEPTED strategy. Then you can ask the participant to discuss potential pitfalls or historical flaws that might have been noted in previous SEPTED implementation. And then at the end, you can use the right-hand column to sum up some historical pitfalls or things that you might watch out for in current SEPTED planning. So as you can see, the topics are intersectionality, community engagement, technological advancements, inclusive design, data analytics, social capital. On page 2, you'll see we talk then about cultural competence, youth empowerment, the importance of getting input from all the community members, restorative justice, gender perspectives, disability access, and then finally, on the 3rd page, we discuss community policing, policy reforms, community trust, vulnerable populations, equitable resources, a holistic approach, and then innovation and DEI and B concerns. You can take a copy of this QR code with your phone, and that will get you straight to this table that you can use or adapt in any way that you find necessary. So, is this personal or business? I could fill several more sessions of this conference with topics surrounding the psychological security needs, business risk management, and/or the limitations of criminal justice and crime prevention initiatives due to lack of funding. However, I will simply propose that the principles of SEPTED are both personal and business. The crime prevention sector is as complex as its counterparts in the criminal justice field, although immediate positive outcomes can be elusive. Taking small, consistent action steps can be the key to lasting change. There are some differences in the implementation of SEPTED principles between the USA, Europe, and other countries throughout the globe. These differences can be attributed to various variations in cultural context, urban planning approaches, legal frameworks, and historical backgrounds. Here are a few distinctions. Legal and regulatory frameworks. European countries often have different legal and regulatory frameworks compared to the US. These frameworks influence the implementation of SEPTED principles. For example, European countries may have stricter data protection and privacy laws, which can affect the certain SEPTED strategies like surveillance systems. Urban planning approaches are also vary globally. Urban planning approaches can vary, leading to differences in SEPTED in how it's integrated into design and development of cities. For instance, European cities generally prioritize mixed-use land, pedestrian-friendly environments, and public transportation systems, which may result in different SEPTED strategies compared to the more car-centric urban planning parts found in the USA. Globally, you can also find differences in historical context. Different countries have a much longer history of urban development as compared to many cities in the US. As a result, European cities often have more compact and interconnected urban environments, which can influence the application of SEPTED principles. The historical context and architectural heritage of these cities across the globe may require a nuanced approach to SEPTED implementation. Cultural factors may also play a significant role in the implementation differences of SEPTED across the globe. Many cities have diverse cultural contexts and historical identities that shape how SEPTED principles are approached. Different culture norms, perceptions of safety, and community dynamics may influence the emphasis placed on certain SEPTED principles or the strategies employed to address specific safety concerns. And then finally, funding and resources. The funding availability and resource allocation for urban planning and crime prevention initiatives can vary widely across the globe. These differences may affect the scale, scope, and implementation of SEPTED projects in various regions. The International SEPTED Association, ICA, is a nonprofit, non-governmental professional organization promoting the proper use of crime prevention through environmental design. And they have not only local chapters, but meetings, speakers, resources. They're active in busting myths about SEPTED. Next, another organization is ASIS International. This is an organization where you can connect with over 34,000 global security professionals to grow your network and navigate trends. You can gain access to the resources it takes to advance and stay vigilant as threats evolve. You can navigate industry trends, advance your career, expand your knowledge. You can find details about membership, security trends, industry guidelines and standards, plus many more resources at www.asisonline.org. In conclusion, crime prevention through environmental design remains a powerful approach that focuses on designing and managing our built environments to deter crime and enhance safety. By considering factors such as lighting, landscaping, access control, and community engagement, SEPTED aims to create spaces that not only reduce the opportunity for criminal activity, but also can promote community well-being. It's all about creating environments that naturally discourage crime and empower individuals to feel safe, secure in their surroundings. Through SEPTED, we can transform our neighborhoods, campuses, public spaces into vibrant, inclusive, and crime-resistant environments that foster a sense of contribution to the overall quality of life for everyone. Remember that we have the opportunity to shape our communities for the better. By embracing SEPTED principles, we can transform our communities into havens of belonging, safety, and opportunity. Let's work together to build a future where everyone feels secure, empowered, and connected. Thank you for this opportunity. Please feel free to email me or connect with me online by scanning this QR code in LinkedIn.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Ms. Talat. It was very interesting. Now we're going to pass the floor to Aida Weisskopf. She's a professor of criminology and criminal justice from the Missouri State University. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Misty. That was very interesting. And I'm kind of in the same vein of research into preventing crime, but more so from a theoretical perspective and a practical perspective. But I really appreciated your presentation. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing your time with us. My name is Aida, and I'm a professor at Missouri State. And I'm going to speak to you this morning a little bit about some research I've done on restorative justice. I'm going to share my screen so I can begin. You can see my presentation. So For a long time now, I have been interested in restorative justice, and I've actually written a couple of textbooks on restorative justice with one of my coworkers. It's a comprehensive textbook that talks about the various facets of restorative justice. And very often when we think of the concept of restorative justice, we think of its application in a community setting. We think of it in terms of circles of dialogue and healing that would take place in a school, in a workplace, even in community corrections. It's also more popular. My research kind of takes restorative justice a step back and connects community corrections with in an incarceration setting for the very reason that they are both so intertwined. For decades now, and I believe since probably the late 1980s, since we ushered in the era of Get Tough on Crime, and we started promoting policies like 3 strikes and you're out, and the abolition of federal parole, and the sort of Get Tough, even in the school system, experienced the zero tolerance policies that have kind of created this school to prison pipeline, and simply just an explosion of the number of people that are under federal, state, and local correctional authority. Different figures range anywhere from 2 million to 2.5 million people on average that are in some type of custodial correctional setting. You know, despite these alarming numbers that only continue to increase, we keep building prisons and making prisons bigger and more restrictive. We just got a new jail here in Greene County, Missouri. That's about twice as big as the old jail, and it's full, which kind of makes me wonder how that worked out. But what we always seem to forget, though, is that the majority, and approximately 2/3, maybe even more, of people that enter prison will be released at some point and return back into the community. A lot of research has, over time and again, have shown, the literature shows that the first 3 to 6 months of an offender's release is really the most critical time period where you can catch that individual and intervene to kind of break that cycle of reincarceration and reoffending. The problem with that 3 to 6 month time period is that this is where offenders are the most challenged. They are trying to find housing, they are trying to find employment, they are managing debts, they're trying to reconnect with family, they're trying to reconnect with their community. As a matter of fact, I learned this reentry simulation here in Missouri. Every year we have a reentry conference. That's a statewide conference that goes on at Lake of the Ozark. That's absolutely amazing if you want to connect with providers and learn innovative techniques for crime control and managing offending populations in prison and in the community. And it was called a reentry simulation. And what they do is they divide you into groups, and you know, inmates aren't even really divided into groups, they're on their own, but they give you these cards, and each card represents a problem or a resource, and you are constantly managing the problem versus the resource. And if you run out of resources, your parole is revoked, or you get a violation and you're resent to prison. And literally, you know, about 80% of practitioners in that simulation, and I do this with my students too, end up getting revoked, going back to prison because they've run out of resources and they've got more problems. So what do we do about this? In about 2018 or 19, it was right before COVID, we began a study at the Greene County Jail that looked at the concept of restorative reintegration as an option. So what is restorative reintegration as an option to traditional methods of reentry. So let's take a look first briefly at what restorative justice is. Restorative justice has been around for decades, since a little bit before the 70s, began a movement that began in Canada that was more of an idealistic approach that tries to understand the social context within which crime is committed. You try to identify patterns of deviant behavior and not just wait till criminality begins and then you try to break the cycle of criminality. You're trying to identify those patterns on the front end. The approach is based on the assumption that society and in general, in the community in specific, should bear some responsibility in correcting those conditions that could have contributed to the offender's behavior. It sounds great in theory. It's very ideological. It's sometimes been seen as being soft on crime, but it is anything but being soft on crime. We're trying with restorative justice to be realistic. We're trying to recognize that the acceptance of responsibility and the willingness to participate in rehabilitation, restitution programs is really the key to breaking the cycle of criminality. The goals of restorative justice are very lofty and very ethically sound in terms of being sensitive to the victim and their needs. The primary goal is to repair the harm. The offender has to make amends for the harm done to the victim and to the community in order to accept responsibility for the crime. Making amends means restoring financial loss or damage, as well as serving the community that was affected by the crime. The goal of restorative justice is also to encourage dialogue between stakeholders. So the stakeholders are programs that allow offenders and victims to come face to face to develop a shared understanding of the impact of crime, to encourage dialogue between community volunteers that are willing to participate in the reparative process and provide them with an opportunity to have a direct influence on offenders, and by being yet another collateral contact for the offender and encouraging responsible behavior. And finally, really a transformative role of community and government. The adoption of restorative justice has to be sort of bought into and seen as a key and integral part of the process of rehabilitation and reintegration of offenders into the community. So when we look at reentry, and when reentry began to be a really big thing, I would say in the maybe mid to late 90s, and it just kind of became a buzzword, and it focused very intensely on assessment and the assessment in major components that revolved around substance abuse, housing, education, employment, finances, family relationships. There's an emphasis on offenders staying clean, finding housing, finishing school if they haven't finished high school, holding down a job, paying child support if they need to, and staying away from certain neighborhoods and people that are negative influences. Those are all wonderful aspects of reentry, but there isn't a lot of time or attention to the psychosocial aspects of offender reentry that really do play, according to literature, a key role in them becoming successful in what's required of traditional reentry. So what are those psychosocial aspects of reentry? What are those unspoken needs? Well, as we see it, they are forgiveness, acceptance, respect, companionship, self-esteem, and a lot more. If you look at the next slide, these are little sticky notes where offenders were asked, what do you need for successful reentry? And those were the things they said. They didn't just say housing, they said safe housing. they didn't just say employment, they said meaningful employment. They cite things such as childcare. One thing that, struck me was empathy. They need health care, they need family support, they need compassion, as some of the notes say. They don't just need housing, they need affordable housing. They need gainful employment, meaning it has to be meaningful and it has to increase their self-esteem and utilize their skills. Some of the notes you can see, they say, to be nurtured, I need esteem building, I need a mentor, I need classes for learning my identity, how to be healthy, mind, body, and spirit. So I thought those were just some of the most interesting, including chocolate cake and a steak dinner. Those other things really did play on those psychosocial aspects that I thought was really amazing. So the basic approach to restorative reentry is that this is about empowerment. And I know it kind of seems a little redundant or counterintuitive to use the term empowerment and offender, because we always think of victim empowerment and we never want to lose sight of that. But restorative reentry is, for a significant portion of it, is about empowering the offender, because they do feel powerless. I had an officer once tell me that an offender was released after maybe 10 years of incarceration, and they were on a bus ride home, and they were being supervised. I guess this was way back in the 80s. I guess that's how they did it. Or they were being transported to the place where they get released, and they went to the restroom, and they came back out and kind of looked puzzled and bewildered. And the officer was like, "Are you okay? What's going on?" And they were like, "Well, I can't wash my hands." And the officer was like, "What do you mean you can't wash your hands?" And he said, "There's no water. I can't turn the water on." And it was because they were locked up for so long that they no longer those kind of knobs became obsolete, and everyone knows you put your hand under the faucet and the water comes on, and they were just puzzled and completely baffled by how that works. So it's something so trivial, but it's just a small example of the feeling of kind of powerlessness and helplessness and kind of being lost. And for that reason, the goal of restorative reentry is to focus attention on identifying areas of strength, whether they be the offender, their family, or their community. With that in mind, restorative reentry focuses on 5 major areas: skill development through agency networking, addressing physical health and wellness, moral inclusion of the ex-offender within a targeted community. So there has to be a way for them, an outlet for them to feel included in something, to receive acceptance and forgiveness through mentoring, through family counseling and the such. Encouraging the ex-offender to accept responsibility for their acts. So you terminate disapproval and begin reconciliation. Their life up until the point of exiting the prison system and rejoining the community has been about disapproval. Being in prison is a constant reminder of their state of disapproval, their status of disapproval. And being released has to begin with reconciliation, and finally creating the opportunity for ex-offenders to give back to their community through participation in community service. Just quick mention, so for the sake of time, restorative justice is rooted in sound criminological theory. I'm very big on theory. I teach most of the theory classes here at Missouri State. It's very important that we don't pull something out of the hat, and that it is tied to an appropriate pedagogy that has been researched and found to work in various contexts and through over the test of time. So peacemaking criminology is really where restorative justice is housed. Peacemaking criminology is about responding to social problems, finding alternative solutions that embrace principles of healing, restoration, and empowerment to the victim as well, not just the offender. Restorative justice is rooted in peacemaking criminology because it's about problem solving, and solving the problems of crime becomes connected to broader principles of social justice and equity. Assessing the need for reentry. So this is the study that I was talking about, where a colleague and I went inside the Greene County Jail. We conducted a series of focus groups over an 8-week period of time. The focus groups were average 10 to 12 Greene County Jail inmates. We kind of advertised the study and said, we want to get your opinion on this concept that we're looking into. We didn't have any selection criteria. Volunteers were solicited based on that advertisement. We did not have a shortage of volunteers. People were enthusiastic and eager to participate. They were sessions that were conducted twice a week for 1 hour with 2 researchers in the room. There was always some that was facilitating the discussion, and someone else taking extensive notes that were later organized and typewritten. We presented them restorative reentry with using the core model of restorative justice. We talked to them about mediation and what that entails, where 2 or more parties get together and there's a neutral facilitator. We talked about this as a chance to get the victim in the same room and bring them together, and especially if there's family members and friends of a returning offender. And we talked to them about family group conferencing. And family group conferencing is a little bit different because it involves some of the individuals that have some decision-making power within the life of the offender. And it allows families and groups to come together to discuss those things and generate a plan of action moving forward. So mediation, family group conferencing, restorative circles, very similar to family group conferencing. The restorative circles are moderated more through a facilitator who remains in the room and encourages healing, support, and reintegration. And we also presented them with the concept of victim impact panels and what those mean, and how they are used to develop empathy and raise the offender's awareness of crime's impact on the victim and on society in general and the community in terms of emotional suffering, material loss, physical injury, and mental trauma. Our study revealed a very different and unique perception of reentry through the eyes and voices of the offender. Once they understood our approach, they advocated for that strength-based engagement and empowerment. They articulated a need to increase their level of commitment to social norms through this strength-based approach. They kind of craved and sought attachment to community and institution, and they indicated that they were looking for a way to decrease their reliance and dependence on the state or on family members. These are some of the quotes that we found so profound, the ones that really articulated this need for a strength-based approach. You know, I don't want to read them all just in the interest of time. But one of my favorites are the bottom one from the top. I know what I did was wrong and I'm paying for it by being here. Everyone makes mistakes, but everyone deserves to be forgiven, especially after they've done their time. We need to be assured that we are forgiven, not just by our families, but by society in general. This is the only way that we can let go of the past and start new. I need someone to tell me that it's okay, that I am still loved and that I can be capable of love and that I'm still respected and accepted. I need someone that I can look up to, a sort of role model that can teach me how to be caring and compassionate. And these are just a very small handful of the quotes that we found to reiterate the struggles, the need to connect with family, how difficult it is to connect with family while being inside prison, and how restorative reentry should start inside the prison and the process of reentry. should begin way before the moment you step out of prison. So just to kind of wrap up this strength-based strategy to reentry, what are we really advocating? We're advocating building on an offender's personal skills, their strengths, their assets. Believe it or not, they do have personal skills, strengths, and assets. We focus on their positive areas and not just their deficits. We focus on developing personal and technical skills. We get them to become proficient education-wise and work-wise. We get them to be marketable. We encourage them to become positive members of the wider community to reduce the social shame and stigma that's caused by their criminal behavior. It's community-led and driven reintegration is the core foundation suggested here. This model incorporates the ideological and programmatic components of restorative justice, where the community is a primary agent of formal and informal efforts at reintegration, and the role of community is transformed to include empowering the quality of reentry services. One thing that's very dear to my heart is the reparative board part of the reentry process, because I've been part of those reparative boards for over 17 years now, and this is where we meet with ex-offenders in a community setting, and we kind of act as sometimes a cheerleading team, sometimes a kind of a squad of moms that just says, hey, listen, you moms and dads, we've had men, we've just had a lot of women recently, we've have not had a lot of men on the reparative board, but it really works. It's kind of that idea of reintegrative shaming where you know, we put a burden on the offender to change and accept responsibility, change their motive, change their attitude, and to adapt the norms and values of a responsible, law-abiding citizen. We're kind of a liaison between the victim, community service organizations, community partners, and the offender and their family. Just a little bit more about reparative boards. Successful reintegration of offenders therefore means a mutual reconciliation between the offender and society. There's no way for the offender to be reconciled to society if society cannot be reconciled with the offender. And this means a mobilization of community-wide resources to repair the harm caused by the criminal behavior, and at the same time, work on reintegrating that offender into the community. In conclusion, reentry should be perceived as a process, not a stage. I think that kind of summarizes my entire approach to reentry. It is not a stage. It's not something that happens. You don't wake up and do reentry. It's a process that should begin the moment an inmate honestly enters prison. The concept of reentry and reintegration, especially for offenders that are not there very long term, should be about transformation into a law-abiding citizen and acceptance and healing and finding strengths and not simply assessing for deficits and weaknesses. It's really the missing puzzle pieces during reintegration, and it's how to bridge the divide between the needs of the community for safety and the needs of the offender for restoration. And I feel like only then will true social integration occur, and the meaning of rehabilitation will become part of the offender's redefinition of self and of being a positive member and a self-fulfilling role within the community. Thank you so much. That concludes my presentation, and I appreciate your time, and I believe we are going to open it up for questions and answers.
Yeah, thank you very much, Aida. We have a question in the WOBA platform, so if it's okay with you, I can read it.
Sure.
Abu Bakar Muhammad Jibrin asks, how environment can be protected from crime attackers for a community development and services? Do you want me to read it again, or I can?
No, I think there's many answers to that, but if you look up the crime prevention strategies, it involves so many different things to include, entrances and exits, lighting, access, egress and ingress, clear sight lines, unobstructed views of the public versus private areas. So if you have a new center or a place that you're looking to increase or make it more crime resistant, that's where you would start. If you can get with a community organization or a security professional that is well versed in CPTED principles, that's where you can start. And depending on your budget, there are many of those things that you can do relatively inexpensively. And then as your budget increases, of course, the amounts of programs and procedures that you can put in place goes up from there. So that's where I would start with that. You'd start with a talk about budget, and then talk about your end goals, and then of course keeping all those things in mind that we talked about with as far as being inclusive with the community, culturally sensitive, and keeping in mind the things that although you want to be crime resistant, you also want to be a part of the community. So you have to balance all those things together. I hope that helps.
Ida, do you want to address that question? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, Athena. Thank you so much for your question. Restorative justice is applicable in a variety of different circumstances. A lot of people do think it's most suitable for not necessarily juvenile offenders, but first-time nonviolent offenders, because you're talking about bringing victims and offenders in a room and a dialogue. A lot of people do find that more useful in terms of the application of restorative justice. But in our textbook, and this is in case anybody's interested in restorative justice, we apply the principles of restorative justice in all settings and with all types of criminal offense contexts, because the hallmark of restorative justice is volunteerism. And that's volunteerism on the part of community members, on the part of the offender, and on the part of the victim. That's the only way restorative justice can work. And here in Missouri, in one of our state prisons, they have implemented restorative justice concepts within the lifers. And you think, well, what on earth is that all about? Well, a lot of these men in prison, and it's a men's prison. I can't think of the county it's in now. It's our largest prison in Missouri. But I went and visited this prison, and I talked to these offenders, and I visited this program, and it kind of sparked my interest in restorative reentry in prison even more, because they had these lifers working on quilts for children that were the victims of crime. Just beautiful quilts, and making teddy bears. They had them working on care packages when our city of Joplin here was destroyed by a tornado years ago, or hurricane, tornado, whatever it was awful. Joplin was a devastating experience where hundreds of thousands of people lost their homes, and they had them working on packages. And why do we want to make them do that? Because they yearn for giving back. They yearn for restoration. And we can argue that they might not deserve that, but in a prison setting where you're dealing with populations that are there for life and that can either do those things or become a management tool, that's a chance for restorative justice to make a positive impact on those people. Not to mention victims that receive these things, that recognize that this is someone's way of giving back for the harm that they've committed. So I think it can work with any crime in any context, as long as the victim and the offender have a mutual respect for one another and the ability to volunteer and not be coerced or kind of talked into it.
Thank you very much. Athena also introduces a discussion here. I don't know if you can see the comment in Zoom. Well, I can read it. A private policy introduction in urban areas is unthinkable in almost all European countries. Policy systems in Europe are bound to the Constitution. Private policy groups are not. An effort of an Islamic Brotherhood to introduce a private policy group in the neighborhood, which police group would have had to impose cultural rules, ended in the arrest by the governmental police. Secondly, constitutional rules in Europe forbid massive surveillance systems and profiling. The European Court of Human Rights has condemned the profiling in public airports, even committed by the national police officers. So the whole notion discussed in the presentation could, I think they're referring to Misty's presentation, could never be introduced in Europe. This is not a cultural difference, it is a constitutional and legal difference in our systems. Thank you for allowing these short critical remarks.
Yeah, that was pointed out in the global differences. There are many things where certain environments and certain parts of the globe rely more heavily on surveillance, part of CEPTED, but there are many other areas that are prohibited of using the surveillance part, and still CEPTED principles involve lighting, involve clear sight lines, use of hedges, use of walkways and retaining walls. So the principles of CEPTED are not just about surveillance and technological. It's about using smart designs that allow for clear sight lines and crime-resistant areas in your green spaces, in your parks, and things like that. So although a lot of the principles, especially here in the United States, do involve an element of surveillance, that is often not the principal proponent of CEPTED. So it involves many more things besides surveillance, even just the use of bollards. So if you've ever been to an airport that has huge pieces of art between the parking lot and the front door, that is a use of CEPTED. So that is a beautiful piece of art at first glance, but at second glance, it's put there so that vehicles that might be caused trying to do harm or nefarious actions inside of airport cannot enter into where pedestrians are walking. So there's a physical barrier. So that is a principle of CEPTED that is used globally. And so those are some of the differences. But yes, I agree that there are differences for every country that has to do with laws and the way that they do. But CEPTED principles are still used in those countries.
Thank you. And there's another question. Are there types of crimes in which restorative justice tools and strategies are more effective, like juvenile crimes, or are they suitable even to serious crimes against life?
I think I answered that.
You already, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. If there are no other comments, or do you want to comment on each other's presentation? Or let's see if someone else from the public wants to ask something. If not, I think we can close the conversation.
I think it was great, and I appreciate the opportunity. And of course, it's wonderful to be able to share these topics. And I think they both boil down to get involved in your community, because that's crime prevention and restorative justice. They're all about the greater good, making things better for your neighbor, making your communities better for everyone. So I hope that sparks some action on your part, and you can get involved on something that can lead to better change.
Exactly. Yes. Someone in WUVA is asking if you can show your book again to,
Oh,
or
sure.
give the information about it.
Sure. Yep, so it's restorative justice, integrating theory, research, and practice. It's in its second edition. And if you look up restorative justice and my last name, this will undoubtedly pop up on Google or Amazon. It's really one of the few books that have been written in a comprehensive way on restorative justice in many different contexts. So I believe strongly in it. I believe it can work. There's always room for anger and hurt when it comes to crime. We can't dismiss that and pretend like that's not part of it. But the idea is that people that go to prison are overwhelmingly going to come out into the community. So it's best to prepare for it in a positive way than just focus on the hurt and anger.
Thank you very much for
Thank you.
these important reflections, and we hope to see you in the next conferences and next year as well.
Thank you so much.
Have a
Bye-bye.
great day.
You too.